My name is Sarah, and I am 38 years old. For 4 years, I was the woman whose husband had taken his own life, but the secret I carry now is far heavier than my grief ever was. It's a secret about a truth I was never supposed to find, and a revenge I never thought I was capable of. The official story, the one the police typed up and filed away back in 2020, was a tragedy. A suicide. That was the story I learned to live with, a poison I swallowed every single morning as I stared at a face in the mirror I no longer recognized. But then, a single message from my past, a ghost from a life I thought was long gone, changed everything. It was from my old high school English teacher, and with it, she sent a piece of drone footage from that horrible day. Her words were simple, but they lit a fire that burned down the entire world I knew. Look closely. What I found didn't just prove my husband's death wasn't a suicide, it proved it was a murder, hidden in plain sight, orchestrated by the one person I thought I could trust. And it set me on a path to deliver a justice the law could never imagine. It's strange, the things you remember when you try to rewind a life. Before the lie, there was Liam. My Liam. When I try to picture him now, it's not the tragedy that comes first. It's the small, inconsequential moments that stitch together the fabric of a shared existence. It's the scent of his specific brand of coffee, a dark roast from a small shop we discovered on a rainy Saturday, brewing in the kitchen and serving as my real alarm clock. It's the weight of his arm, solid and warm, draped around my shoulders as we watched some mindless action movie, his thumb absently rubbing circles on my arm. It's the specific, rumbling way he'd laugh, a sound that started deep in his chest, when I'd say something utterly ridiculous. That laugh could make a crowded, noisy room feel like it was just the two of us, a private world carved out of sound. We met in a dusty, forgotten corner of our campus library, a place that smelled of aging paper and floor wax. I was a journalism major with a hopelessly romantic view of the world, convinced I could find truth in the fine print. He was a business student with a fire in his eyes and a restlessness in his posture. He was supposed to be studying for a macroeconomics final, but I caught him watching me from behind a ridiculously oversized textbook, a failed attempt at subtlety. His smile, when our eyes finally met, was shy, hesitant, but his eyes were confident, holding a spark of amusement. He finally closed the book with a soft thud and walked over. He didn't use a line. He just nodded at the worn copy of Orwell in my hands and asked, "Figuring out how to save the world?" From that moment, our story began, a conversation that never seemed to end. Liam wasn't just handsome in a conventional, chisel-jaw way. He was fundamentally kind. It was in his hands, the way he'd gently move a stray curl from my face. It was in his eyes, the way they'd crinkle at the corners when he smiled. He possessed a quiet, unassuming ambition, not to conquer the world, but to build something meaningful and lasting within it. He had this rare quality of making you feel utterly safe, not because he was loud or imposing or physically dominant, but because his presence was a promise of steadiness, an anchor in the choppy waters of life. He was my calm. We married under the ancient, sprawling oak trees in my parents' backyard, their branches forming a natural cathedral. He promised me an adventure, and for a while, that's exactly what it was. He and his childhood best friend, Alex, started a small tech company from our garage, surrounded by the smell of sawdust and soldering fumes. They were the perfect duo, a symphony of complementary skills. Liam was the heart, the visionary who dreamed up impossible ideas on whiteboards, his handwriting a frantic, passionate scrawl. Alex was the anchor, the brilliant numbers guy who could look at Liam's chaotic genius and somehow chart a course, making the impossible seem not just practical, but inevitable. Their bond was something I'd never seen before, forged in scraped knees and secret tree houses, now cemented by shared ambition and the exhilarating thrill of success. Their business, a niche software solution for sustainable architecture, exploded. Within a few short years, the garage was replaced by a sleek downtown office, and our small starter home was traded for our dream house. It was a beautiful home with a wide, welcoming porch and a small, wrought iron balcony off the second-floor office. That balcony became Liam's sanctuary. I'd find him there at dawn, a steaming mug of coffee in his hand, either sketching new designs in his leather-bound notebook or just watching the world wake up, a quiet smile on his face. Our life felt perfect. I know how fragile and naive that sounds now, like a line from a movie right before everything goes horribly wrong. But it was our truth. We had a home filled with laughter that echoed off the high ceilings, a loyal and goofy golden retriever named Hubble, and a future that felt boundless and bright. And Alex was the third point of our triangle, the constant, unwavering vertex. He was more than a business partner. He was the brother I never had, the person who knew Liam almost as well as I did. He was at our house for dinner 3 nights a week, his car a familiar sight in our driveway. He was the first person we called for advice, the first to celebrate our wins, the constant, reliable presence in our lives. I trusted him as much as I trusted Liam. There was never, not for a single fleeting second, a reason to doubt the beautiful, solid world we had built together. The day my world shattered was November 29th, 2020. A Sunday. The air was cold and brittle, the kind of cold that seeps into your bones. The sun was a pale, useless disk in a gray, indifferent sky. It all started with a suffocating normality. Liam was in his office, and he'd been distant for weeks. Withdrawn. He moved through the house like a ghost, his usual energy replaced by a heavy, weary silence. I chalked it up to work. When I'd press him, wrapping my arms around him from behind as he stared at his screen, he'd just sigh and mumble about end-of-year stress or tough projections. I let it go. All businesses have their cycles, their ebbs and flows. I should have pressed harder. That afternoon, I decided to run a few errands, a futile attempt to inject some normalcy into the tense atmosphere. I remember standing at his office door, a strange, powerful feeling in my gut telling me to ask him to come with me just to get him out of the house, out of that room. But I didn't. He looked so entrenched, so burdened. I didn't want to add to it. I just told him I loved him. He looked up from his screen, his eyes so tired they seemed bruised, and offered me a weak, distant smile that didn't reach them. "I love you too," he said, his last words to me. An hour later, I drove back into a nightmare. My quiet, suburban street was screaming with the strobing, clashing colors of red and blue lights. Police cruisers and an ambulance were parked haphazardly, their presence an ugly violation of our peaceful neighborhood. That horrible, stark yellow tape was already slicing my life in two, the before and the after. A neighbor, Mrs. Gable from across the street, stared at me, her hand over her mouth, her face a mask of pity I would come to loathe. A police officer, young and grim-faced, intercepted me before I could even get out of my car, before I could process the chaos. The words came later, in a cold, sterile room at the police station that smelled of stale coffee and disinfectant. Detached. Clinical. Liam was gone. He had fallen from his balcony, his favorite spot. Alex found him. Alex called 911. A detective with exhausted, kind eyes, a man named Walsh, gently laid out the official narrative for me. It was being ruled a suicide. Alex, his voice thick and broken with what I thought was unimaginable grief, had already given his statement. He told them he'd stopped by to discuss an urgent work matter. He said Liam was completely distraught, talking about the company going under, about total financial ruin that would wipe us out completely. They had argued. Alex said he'd left, frustrated, telling Liam they needed to talk when he was calmer. He claimed that as he was walking to his car, he heard a sound, a sickening thud, turned back, and saw Liam on the ground below the balcony. To seal the story, they found an unsent email on Liam's computer, a draft addressed to me. It was disjointed, just a few desperate phrases typed out in a rush. "I'm so sorry. I've ruined everything. There's no way out." A suicide note. In the suffocating fog of shock and grief, I didn't question it. How could I? My husband was stressed. His best friend found him, and there was a note. The narrative was neat, tidy, and utterly devastating. The guilt was an anvil on my chest. My husband had been drowning right next to me, and I hadn't even seen the ripples. I accepted the unacceptable because it was the only story I was given. The case was closed, and I was left alone in the wreckage, haunted by the belief that the love of my life had chosen to leave me. The next 4 years were a brutal lesson in the art of survival. It wasn't living, just existing. I sold the house, unable to even look at that side of it, the mere thought of the balcony sending a wave of vertigo through me. I moved to a small, anonymous apartment in a new town with Hubble, our dog, the last living, breathing piece of that life. And Alex became my shadow, my rock. He handled the dissolution of the company, telling me with a heavy, pained heart that it was unsalvageable, that Liam's fears had been correct. He managed Liam's affairs, shielding me from the harsh paperwork of death. He checked on me every single day for the first year, bringing groceries I wouldn't eat, sitting with me in a silence I couldn't fill, sharing his own grief. His presence was a constant, painful comfort, a living link to the man we had both loved and lost. Or so I thought. Then, one Tuesday afternoon in the fall of 2024, an email arrived. The sender was Eleanor Albright, my old high school English teacher, the woman who taught me to find the story within the story, to look for the subtext. She had retired and taken up a volunteer hobby, digitizing old media for the local historical society. She was working on a box of tapes from a local freelance videographer who had passed away, a man who apparently filmed everything, an obsessive archivist of the mundane. My heart stopped when I read the next paragraph. He'd found a file dated November 29th, 2020. The videographer had been testing a new, high-end drone, flying it over our old neighborhood, capturing landscape shots. His flight path took him right past our house. On that day, at that time, "Sarah," she wrote, her words full of careful apology, "I know this is from that awful day. I am so sorry. I almost deleted it, but I saw something. It's probably nothing, just a trick of the light, but it's been bothering me. I contacted the Marion County Police, and they confirmed this footage was never submitted as evidence. I can't shake the feeling that something is wrong. I've attached the file. Please look closely." My hand trembled as I moved the mouse over the icon, a cold dread washing over me, a feeling like standing on the edge of a cliff. With a deep breath that felt like inhaling glass, I clicked download. A small blue bar began to fill, loading a truth that had been hiding in the sky for 4 long years. I double-clicked the file. A bird's-eye view of my old life, crisp and coldly detached, filled the screen. There was the park where we walked Hubble, the tree-lined streets I drove down every day, and then our house. My breath hitched in my throat. The drone's camera, impossibly steady, slowly zoomed in on the second floor. On his balcony, and then a blur of motion, a dark shape tumbling over the railing, a frantic, unnatural movement, falling out of frame. It was so fast, So brutal. I was watching my husband die. I slammed the laptop shut, a strangled sob tearing from my throat as a wave of nausea and grief crashed over me with the force of a physical blow. This was a mistake. A cruel, vicious mistake. I sat there for what felt like an hour, my body shaking uncontrollably, ready to drag the file to the trash, to delete this new trauma forever. But her words echoed in the silent apartment. Look closely. Mrs. Albright was the most meticulous, thoughtful person I knew. She wouldn't send this just to torture me. She saw something. With a resolve born from a deep, desperate need to understand, I opened the laptop again. I imported the file into a simple video editing program, placing the last moments of Liam's life onto a timeline. I dropped the playback speed to 10%, turning the fluid horror into a slideshow of jagged, stuttering frames. I dragged the marker to the seconds right before the fall, my eyes glued to the image of the balcony, my heart pounding against my ribs. And that's when my blood turned to ice. At full speed, it looked like one person, a single desperate act. But frame by agonizing frame, a second figure emerged from the shadows of the office doorway, stepping onto the balcony. Two people were on that balcony, Liam and Alex. Alex, who told the police he was already walking to his car when he heard the fall. The first lie. I zoomed in, the pixels blurring into a grotesque mosaic, but it was unmistakably him. His build, his posture, the dark coat he'd been wearing that day. And they weren't talking. Their bodies were tense, angled towards each other like combatants. An arm gestured, not in conversation, but in short, sharp, aggressive movements. It was a fight. Then I arrived at the moment, frame by agonizing frame. Click! The two men in confrontation, Liam backing away towards the railing. Click! The second figure, Alex, lunges forward with a sudden, explosive force that was pure violence. Click! Liam's body is thrown off balance, his arms flailing as his form twists unnaturally, his legs lifted off the ground as he goes over the railing. It wasn't a jump. He was pushed. He was propelled by the other man's momentum. Click! The final, damning frame. Alex, alone on the balcony, his arms still partially outstretched, his body leaning forward as he watches Liam fall. A guttural sound of pure horror ripped from my soul. The room spun, the walls seeming to warp and melt around me. It was murder. The word was a physical certainty, coursing through me like venom. For 4 years, I had mourned a suicide. For 4 years, I had carried the guilt of not saving him. For 4 years, Alex had held my hand while I cried, his face a perfect mask of shared sorrow. It was all a lie, a monstrous, intricate 4-year lie. Liam didn't leave me. He was stolen from me by the man we called our brother. The grief I had felt before was a dense, suffocating fog, but this was a fire. My shock and horror receded, burned away by a glacial, terrifying clarity. The woman who had cried for 4 years died in that moment, and someone else, someone colder and harder, was born. The footage gave me the how. I needed the why. The police said Liam was distraught over the business failing. Alex had planted that seed, watered it with his fake tears, and watched it grow into the official story. My old journalism instincts, dormant for years, roared back to life with a vengeance. After selling the house, Alex had given me a hard drive with all the company files, a memento, he'd called it. At the time, I couldn't bear to look. Now, I logged into the company's cloud storage with a horrifying new purpose. I spent the entire night digging, fueled by caffeine, and a righteous fury that felt like electricity in my veins. 4 hours, it was just spreadsheets, sales reports, and HR documents. Then I found it. A folder, cleverly mislabeled, Marketing Projections Q4 2020. It wasn't marketing data. It was wire transfers, dozens and dozens of them, stretching back over 2 years. Massive, six-figure sums siphoned from the company account into an untraceable shell corporation registered in the Cayman Islands. He had been systematically embezzling from the company he and Liam built together, bleeding it dry from the inside. The total was staggering, over $7 million. It took me another full day, calling on old university contacts in financial journalism, but I finally pierced the corporate veil. The sole beneficiary of the offshore trust that owned the shell company was Alex Cross. The stress Liam was under wasn't about a failing company. It was the stress of discovering his best friend, his brother, was a thief, robbing him blind. Suddenly, a dozen little memories clicked into place with sickening clarity. A tense phone call I'd overheard a month before he died, where Liam said, "The numbers don't lie, Alex. They just don't. We have to talk." Liam mentioning, offhand, that he'd hired an outside auditor for a routine review, and the flicker of panic I'd seen in Alex's eyes. And the so-called suicide note. I still had the police report with a photo of the screen. Reading it now, the words twisted into a new tragic meaning. "I'm so sorry." He was sorry for the betrayal I was about to discover. "I've ruined everything." He felt his misplaced trust in Alex had ruined their dream, their friendship, our future. "There's no way out." Not for him, for Alex. It wasn't a suicide note. It was a draft. Liam was trying to find the words to tell me his best friend had destroyed them right before he confronted him on that balcony. The argument wasn't about projections. It was Liam confronting Alex with the proof from the auditors. And Alex, cornered and facing prison, chose murder. He killed Liam to silence him, then masterfully crafted the perfect story, using the very financial ruin he had created as the motive. He played the grieving friend, the supportive rock, all while being the architect of my entire nightmare. My first, white-hot instinct was to call him, to scream, to let all the venom and betrayal pour out. But a chilling thought stopped me cold. This man killed his best friend in cold blood to protect his secrets and his stolen fortune. What would he do to me, the only person left in the world who held the evidence to destroy him? Justice wasn't going to come from a phone call. It had to be absolute. Going to the police was an option. Yes, but it wasn't enough. A quiet arrest, a sterile trial he could manipulate with high-priced lawyers who could muddy the waters, who could claim the footage was doctored no. He had curated a public image as the tragic hero, the benevolent businessman who lost his partner and nobly supported the grieving widow. I decided that his punishment had to be just as public as his persona. I wouldn't just send him to prison. I would obliterate the fraudulent world he had built on my husband's grave. I spent the next 2 months planning with the meticulousness of a general preparing for war. I learned through society pages that Alex was set to receive a major Humanitarian Businessman of the Year award at a lavish charity gala, a gala for a foundation he started, supposedly in Liam's memory, to support young entrepreneurs. The irony was so vile it made me physically sick. It was the perfect stage. I called the event organizers, my voice practiced and trembling just enough to be convincing. I introduced myself as Liam's widow. I told them I was finally ready to speak publicly and that I wanted to present the award to Alex myself, to thank him for everything he had done for me and for Liam's legacy. They were overjoyed. It was the perfect emotional climax for their event. The week before the gala, I drove to a town 3 hours away and sent an anonymous, encrypted package to Detective Walsh, the older detective from 4 years ago who had looked at me with such pity. It contained a flash drive with the annotated drone footage, a detailed breakdown of the financial records, and a simple note. Gala for Alex Cross. Saturday night. Be there. Justice for Liam Parker is coming. The night of the gala, I felt like a ghost in a glittering midnight blue gown. The ballroom was filled with the city's elite, all there to celebrate a killer. Alex saw me from across the room, and his face lit up with that same fake, compassionate smile he'd been using on me for 4 years. He rushed over and hugged me, his arms feeling like steel bands around me. He whispered in my ear how brave I was, how proud Liam would be. I almost threw up on his $1,000 shoes. I just smiled back, a cold, dead smile he mistook for healing, and said, "I couldn't miss this, Alex. Not for the world." When the time came, they called me to the stage. A single, hot spotlight found me. Hundreds of faces looked up, expectant and smiling. I walked to the podium, my heart a cold, heavy stone in my chest. Alex stood by the side of the stage, beaming, the picture of pride and humility. "Good evening," I began, my voice miraculously clear and steady over the expensive sound system. "We are here tonight to honor Alex Cross, a man I once called my friend, a man I once called my brother." I paused, letting the words hang in the silent, cavernous hall. For 4 years, he has been hailed as a hero, the man who stood by me after my husband, Liam Parker, tragically took his own life. Alex's smile was cemented on his face, a perfect, polished mask. But the official story isn't always the whole story. A murmur went through the crowd. I looked directly at Alex, and for the first time in 4 years, he saw the ice in my eyes. He saw the woman from the police station, not the broken widow he had so carefully managed. His smile faltered, a flicker of confusion in his eyes. "Liam Parker didn't jump," I said, my voice ringing with a righteous fury I didn't know I possessed. "He was pushed. He was murdered. And the man we are here to honor tonight is his killer." Gasps echoed through the hall. Chaos erupted in ripples as people turned to each other, whispering in shock. "You want proof?" I said into the microphone, my voice cutting through the noise. "Look closely." On the giant screen behind me, which was supposed to show a glowing tribute video to Alex, a new video began to play. The drone footage. I played it once at full speed, the blur of motion, the sickening fall. Then I played the slowed down, annotated version for everyone to see. The two figures, the struggle, the lunge, the push. A collective shriek went through the room as hundreds of people watched a murder in agonizing slow motion. I turned to Alex. His face was a canvas of pure, abject horror and disbelief. The color had drained completely from his face, his jaw slack. His perfect world was atomizing before his very eyes. As the footage ended, leaving the final, damning image of Alex, arm outstretched, watching Liam fall, frozen on the screen, two figures stepped out from the back of the room. Detective Walsh and his partner. The house lights came up, stark and unflattering, and in front of his investors, his new socialite girlfriend, and the entire world he had built on lies, they walked calmly up to the stage, put his hands behind his back, and arrested him for the murder of Liam Parker. The trial was a formality. With the irrefutable video evidence and the mountain of financial data tracing millions to his offshore accounts, his expensive lawyers had nothing to work with. He was found guilty of first-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Justice, in its legal sense, was served. The lie was dead, but in the quiet months that followed the verdict, there was no victory parade. The fire of my rage had burned out, leaving behind an empty, echoing silence. Knowing the world knew Liam hadn't abandoned me brought a certain peace, but it was a cold comfort. I had the truth, but I still didn't have him. I met Mrs. Albright for coffee, and I tried to find the words to thank her. She just smiled her wise, knowing smile and patted my hand. "I just saw a loose thread, Sarah," she said softly. "You were the one brave enough to pull it." Her simple act of paying attention, of not dismissing a small anomaly, had unraveled everything. Life now is different. It's not about moving on. You don't move on from something like this. You move forward, carrying it with you. The truth is a heavy burden, but it's solid ground. Living with a lie is like living in a house with a cracked foundation. You can never rest, never feel stable. The truth, no matter how ugly and brutal, is a foundation you can rebuild on. I can finally mourn my husband for the hero he was, not a man who gave up, but a man who was silenced for fighting for what was right. And I honor him by telling his story, our story, by fighting for the truth, because it's always, always worth fighting for.